Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining. Just to make the best out of everybody's time, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'll first introduce myself. I am Jessica Suniga, the admissions advisor for the College of Pharmacy. Today, we do have multiple speakers joining us. I'll go ahead and briefly introduce them. First, we will be hearing from Priyanka Rao, the Associate Director for UH Career Services. We then have Dr. Austin De La Cruz. He is UHCOP faculty, a board certified pharmacist. He has served in the admissions committee for multiple admission cycles in the past. We will then hear from some of our wonderful incoming pharmacy students. At the end of our session, we will have a quick survey and a Q&A session. If you think of any questions during our presentations, you can just go ahead and drop them in the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. We also do have our co-host that will be joining us in a bit, Ms. Nikisa Sapp. And for our Q&A session, our Director of Admissions, Mr. Morgan Ely. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers. I will now go ahead and hand it over to UH Career Services. Priyanka, whenever you're ready, you can share your screen.
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Priyanka Rao, and I recently started serving as the Associate Director for University Career Services. I have been here for 10 years at UH and at Career Services. So I love the campus, love working with our students, and I will jump into my presentation. Here's my screen. So I'll be talking about building professional relationships and recommendation letters. Just kind of quickly going through a few bullet points. It's important to start talking about letters of recommendation by first building those professional relationships. And how do you build that? Using informational interviewing, and then jumping right into the letters of recommendation. Who should you ask? How you can send those, and of course, how do you ask? So why is it important for us to build professional relationships? If you want to ask someone about writing a recommendation letter for you, it's very important that that person knows you. And which means that maybe they know about your academic performance, they know about some of the extracurricular things you have been doing, maybe about some of the projects that you have been working on. And so it's very crucial that you invest some time and effort in building a professional relationship, whether it's with the faculty members that you're going to ask or your supervisors. And so what are some ideas for you to start connecting with these people? So as you can see here on the screen, trying to be engaged in the class. So some professors may have a huge class and they may not remember a specific person. So ways for you to stand out could be maybe reaching out to the professor during their office hours, or emailing them or talking to them and asking if there are any opportunities for you to be engaged with their research, and even maybe doing an informational interview. And so what is that? An informational interview is a meeting where you're not necessarily asking them about maybe a job or an internship, but really trying to explore or get some insights about how you can better prepare yourself for that job or that position. And so when it comes to developing that relationship with your faculty member, you can set up an informational interview where you're asking them about any suggestions that they may have or tips that they may have for you to be successful in your application process. You can ask, you can share your resume with them, maybe get feedback on the resume. If you are curious about their job and what it looks like, this is also a big part of informational interviewing, you asking them questions about being faculty and working in the academic field or setting. And so this informational interview is a great way for you to start building that relationship, the professional relationship. I was using faculty as an example, but in the next few slides, I'm going to share who you can ask for a recommendation letter. And so you can use this strategy with those people as well. Here are some sample questions that you could ask someone during an informational interview. Again, it's a great way for you to connect with someone from the field and get more information. So jumping into once you have that relationship established and when it's time for you to apply and get those recommendation letters, this is the information that's going to be helpful. So what is a recommendation letter? So it is also called as a letter of reference, and it vouches for a specific person based on their characteristics and qualifications. So as you can see, knowing you it's very important. You don't want someone to write a recommendation letter for you and then select a box that says recommend with reservations, right? So it's always good for you to provide that person with as much information as possible. And so who may ask for this document? So in this case, obviously the audience we have, it's mainly for graduate school application purposes. But sometimes when you're applying for an internship or for a scholarship or for a job, people may require you to submit a letter of recommendation. Also on LinkedIn, you can reach out to people to get recommendations for your work as well. So who should you ask? Definitely check the requirements of the program you're applying to. So if you are applying for the College of Pharmacy, the list that you see on the screen is approved by the college. So either a licensed pharmacist practicing or having practiced in the US, a college professor, an employer that you may have worked with. So if you have your PharmTech license and you have been working somewhere, your supervisor might be a great person. You can ask for a reference, a teaching assistant, pre-health advisor, or your faculty advisor. People not to ask for references is definitely your family, friends, mentors. I would say if they are working in the field of pharmacy and if they know your work, then they would be good, but typically not mentors as well. So we're only looking at professionals from the industry. So how do you ask for a reference? So there are some etiquettes that we recommend following when you're asking someone for a recommendation. Do keep in mind that they are taking time from their busy schedule to write something for you. So please be respectful of, and follow some of these tips that are recommended here. So first, either email the person you're wanting to write a recommendation for you or schedule a face-to-face meeting. Please explain in the email or the meeting what is the purpose of this recommendation. So is it for graduate school? Maybe even sharing, going one step ahead and sharing why you're interested in that grad program. Using specific experiences that the recommender could highlight. So let's say if the College of Pharmacy requires you to talk about or highlight certain experiences, make sure that you are addressing those to your recommender and saying, can you please talk a little bit about these experiences? Now you can either explain to them what skills you have gained or what you have learned related to those experiences, or in addition to that, I strongly recommend you attach your resume as well as your personal statement, because your personal statement is going to highlight those experiences, is going to highlight why you want to work or why you want admission into that university. So please make sure that you attach your resume and your personal experiences. You can also offer, like if they have more questions as they start drafting it, to meet with them. Set a deadline for when you need the recommendation. Students typically tend to do things last minute. So I really recommend that you give your recommenders at least 2 to 3 weeks of time to write a recommendation for you. If you think about a faculty member, they're not writing just one recommendation letter for you. They may be writing 50 or 100 recommendation letters. And so please give them that time. Even a month is a good time. And then just make sure you follow up with them in a couple of weeks. So please plan ahead and don't reach out to your recommenders last minute to ask for that letter. Here is a great email example of what you can write when you're reaching out to your recommender to write a letter for you. So I'll just go ahead and read this. So, dear Dr. Hernandez, I hope you're having a great start to the semester. I'm applying to medical school this cycle, and I wanted to ask if you would be one of my recommenders. Based on the research I have done in your lab, along with our conversations about medical school field, I believe you could speak on my dedication and research abilities. So very important to note that there has been some touch points with this faculty member. Would you like to set up a virtual meeting to discuss the recommendation further? If you are available to be a recommender, I will provide you with the list of programs that I'm applying for. So sharing information. The programs will email you a link to a portal to provide the recommendation. The deadline is January 4th or June 4th. I have also attached my CV and personal statement and highlighted other experiences I have done that are connected to the research I did in your lab. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you. So from this sample email, you can see how detailed and thorough the student is. So this is the email you could use to reach out to a faculty member or a supervisor who you would like to submit a recommendation letter for you. And then some final tips. Do not ask someone who will not write a strong letter for you. So if that person maybe knows you barely or your work, it's not a great choice. Do not assume that everyone will say yes. So as I mentioned earlier, your advisor or a faculty member may have to write a lot of recommendations. And if you reach out last minute, you may not have given them enough time. And so they may not say yes. Have a list of potential recommenders. So come up with a list of at least 5 to 6 people. So if you email 6 people, maybe 3 of them will say yes. Give recommenders a minimum of 2 weeks to write. So yes, please keep the time frame in mind. Provide an earlier date for them to turn in the recommendation. So if your application is due, let's say March 1st, tell your recommenders that it would be great if they can finish the recommendation letter by February 15th. So between today and February 15th, you've given them more than a month's notice. And then maybe end of January, you can just send them a reminder email saying, hey, I'm just checking in. If you need any more information to write that letter, and I'm really grateful for you taking the time to do that for me. And last but not the least, make it easy for them to write that letter for you. The more information you provide about yourself, the more, maybe at least having one meeting with them in person or virtually to explain what you're going for, what experiences you're highlighting, even maybe your goals, like what do you want to do once you graduate with a degree in PharmD. So be very open and have that communication. And of course, treat this as a very professional conversation or interaction, because as I said, they're taking that time to write the letter for you. So just stay professional and follow all the etiquettes. So that's all from some quick tips from me for today. If you are a currently enrolled UH student, you are welcome to use our career services. This is our website, uh.edu /UCS and our social media. You can schedule an appointment with our career advisors to help you with your personal statement, your resume, or even with the recommendation email, the emails that you may need to send out to faculty and staff. So thank you again, everyone. And if I'll hang around because I guess we're doing questions at the end. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. And then for our guests, if y'all do have any questions, just go ahead and drop them in the Q&A. And like I mentioned, we will be addressing those at the end. I will now hand it over to Dr. Dela Cruz.
All righty, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Dela Cruz. I am a clinical assistant professor here at the College of Pharmacy. My specialty is in psychiatric pharmacy. So I teach in the neurology module for third-year pharmacy students and in the psychiatry module. And I also have a clinic site at the Michael E. DeBakey VA Medical Center where I care for veterans with various mental health disorders. So asking me first and foremost, why are letters of recommendation important? Well, I think this is a very good topic. I am one of the members that has served on the admissions and progressions committee for several years now, and I can tell you that letters of recommendation are extremely important. So first and foremost, let's make this a little interactive. If y'all can put in the chat, what do you think is the main goal for you as applicants when you submit your pharmacy school application? Now, feel free to let me know, okay, to get accepted into pharmacy school, that's important. Why else is an application important for you? See what type of student you are. Good. Thank you, Eric. So I would agree with both of those statements. I would take it one step further and actually say that the main goal of a strong application is for you to stand out. We receive hundreds of pharmacy school applications each semester. So out of all of these hundreds of applications, what makes your application unique? What makes us want to choose you specifically compared to all of these other students? Now, of course, we look at grades, we look at your PCAT if you elect to take it, volunteer activities, work experience, pharmacy experience, certificate, honors, publications. All of these different things are different aspects of your application, but I want to point out that letters of recommendation are no different. We still want to see how you stand out in your letters of recommendation and what separates you from your peers, right? I can see just how good you are at biology by looking at your biology grades, right? So having a letter of recommendation that says, oh yes, Johnny performed well on his quizzes and exams, that tells me absolutely nothing from an admission standpoint. What I want to see are your qualities, your strengths, your efforts, your personality, all of the different aspects that I can't see in your general application. So that's exactly why your letter of recommendation is so important to help you stand out. So in addition to that, your letter of recommendation helps us determine your presence in the classroom. Now let's think about how large an average undergraduate class is at UH. And oftentimes we change students each semester. So it can be very difficult for faculty members to truly know each and every student. So a letter of recommendation will definitely help me determine how you stand out from your peers. That will help determine how hard of a worker you are. How much did you participate in the classroom? Did you ask questions? Were you involved in your groups? Were you a leader? All of these things that will help us determine whether or not that professor will vouch for you and whether or not they even know who you are. I can tell you that one thing that we commonly see are letters of recommendation where these professors have no clue who this student is and they can't speak to their qualities. They can't speak to their strengths. All they have is that grade in Blackboard. And again, that's not necessarily something we want to see. So that brings up my third point, that letters of recommendations are extremely important. All right, this isn't just a checkbox as we go through our application. Oftentimes students don't take it as seriously, and they may ask 3 people at the very last minute, hey, do you mind writing me a letter of recommendation? But this process definitely takes time. So one challenge that I would have for you, all of the students that are online right now, is brainstorm right now and think about potentially 5 people who could write you a letter of recommendation. All right. At least 5, I would say, because there may be times where a letter of recommendation writer may not be available. There may be times where they tell you 2 weeks before that they can't write the letter of recommendation. Now, hopefully that doesn't happen, but I can tell you that I have seen it. So if you can think of 5 right off the bat, you're in good standing right now. If you can't, then I would say that you have some work to do to really start to know a lot of those people that can write your letter of recommendation. All right. You have some work to really try to get to know some of your professors. All right. So if we think about a general application, right? Let's think about Johnny. We'll say that he's an average student, maybe receives average grades, didn't really work in his undergrad, didn't really do a lot of volunteer activities, but across the board, he was very average. But we have 3 very strong letters of recommendation that talks about some of the volunteer experience that Johnny did, or his employer, or a professor that said that, Johnny actually really stood out despite the fact that he received a B in this class. He failed his first exam. He made it to all of the office hours. He made it to all of the test reviews. He was a leader in his group. That really tells us a lot. And that can be the tipping point of what exactly we need to see from Johnny, because the rest of the application was just average. And now let's think about the opposite scenario where we have another individual who may be, again, very average. We'll say Adam is very average, but then we have 3 letters of recommendation that are also saying, well, we don't really know Adam too well. We weren't able to observe Adam. Honestly, we don't really know a lot to say about Adam. That may be the tipping point for us as a committee, saying that, Adam didn't take the time to really know his professors. He didn't take the time to speak up in class. He didn't take the time to ask for help when he was struggling. And it's important for us to see that and to know that if an individual is struggling, that they are willing to ask for help. I can tell you that there's been many times that I've failed exams during my undergraduate career in pharmacy school, but the main point is whether or not I decided to ask for help or try to take all of that burden on my own to try to change. So oftentimes asking for help, making those positive changes, that shows resiliency. And that's definitely something that we're looking for in the admissions committee. Okay. Career Services did a great job covering all of the relationship building tips. I can't stress to you how important it is to really take the time to get to know your professors. I feel that a lot of times students are very apprehensive and a little unsure when it comes to talking to professors. I can tell you that, we're people too. It's okay. We've been in your exact position where we're trying to get the highest grades in our classes. We're trying to really stand out. So just making an effort to talk to us, to approach us, really means a lot. And I really enjoy when students do take that time and effort to get to know me, because I can tell you in pharmacy school, we have 120, 130 students per class. There's no way that I'm going to know each and every single person very well. So it's up to them to make that first move and to approach me. And I would say that it's up to you right now to really make that first move and approach that professor to try and get to know them. Another main point I want to cover that was also mentioned from Career Services is that time frame suggestion. I would say the ideal time frame is actually a couple of months, at minimum 1 month. I would say try not to delay. I can tell you that as a natural procrastinator when I was a student, and to be honest, I'm still a procrastinator, but I'm working on it. One of the quotes that stuck out to me and really stood out was, when is the best time to plant a tree? Well, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time to plant a tree is actually today. So if you know that you have things that need to be done, try your best to knock it out as soon as possible and not wait until the last minute, because the longer you wait, the less time that letter of recommendation writer has to really think about some positive words and really take time to sit down and write that letter of recommendation. Also, I can tell you that a lot of letter of recommendation deadlines are due at very difficult times of the year. Sometimes I'm writing letters of recommendation that are due on December 26th, the day after Christmas, or due January 2nd, the day after New Year's. And so what I try to do is start and finish as early as possible. And just this semester alone, I wrote about 8 letters of recommendation. And on average, it takes me about 2 hours to write these letters of recommendation. Now, keep in mind that I know these students very well. They're all 4th-year pharmacy students, and they're applying for residency programs. And so I have a lot to say about these students, but that's why it's so important to really start early, to give your letters of reference writers time to brainstorm and also time to observe you. Asking them very early in the semester, that way they already know right off the bat who you are, and they can observe you in a classroom setting. They can observe you in a lab setting as well. Okay. But other than that, those are some of the main topics that I wanted to cover with you today. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me during the question and answer session. But best of luck to all of you.
Thank you so much, Dr. De La Cruz. I will now pass it over to Mrs. Sapp, who is working with our UHCOP incoming students. It looks like she's experiencing some audio issues. Let's see.
So I can help fill the void. There's actually one thing I forgot to mention as we figure out the audio. I want to share an example of one of the students that asked me to write them a letter of recommendation. So let me go ahead and share my screen. 1 second. Okay, can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay, so this was amazing. This was the very first time that a student has sent a template like this, but it was extremely helpful for me as a letter of recommendation writer. These were all of the different residency programs that she was applying to. She separated it out. When is the letter of reference or recommendation due? Do they require a formal letter specifically addressing that institution? And then also, what is the program website? So you can see here, breaking it down was very helpful for me. In addition to that, she went in and talked about reasons that she's interested in pursuing a residency. Oh, let me go down here. And these are all of the 5 main areas that and why as to she wants to pursue a residency and get this extra training after pharmacy school. Her areas of interest in pharmacy, and also the areas that she wanted me to highlight. Again, when I see these students and I interact with them for about 6 weeks on their rotations with me, I'm with them directly from 8 to 5 p.m. So there's so many different things that I can talk about, but the fact that she had me highlight some specific areas really helped me focus on the specifics that she wanted me to include. And other letters of reference writers, she may have chosen different skills. She may have chosen the oral communication skills, her assertiveness. So again, this was very helpful. I would recommend for y'all, as you do start to ask your letters of reference writers, to also have a template like this. This would be very helpful for them. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. De La Cruz. That was a great template. I've never seen that before either. Mrs. Sapp, did you want to try your audio now? No, not yet. Okay. Michael, you can go ahead and introduce yourself, just a brief introduction and whatever you would like to share with our prospective students.
Hello, my name is Michael. I am a sophomore at U of H as of now, and currently U of H calls the PharmC class of 2027. And I'd also like to go ahead and talk about how to obtain prospective letters of recommendation and what to some specific things you might want to avoid. Dr. Priyanka showed a little slide that showed who should you ask for a letter of recommendation. So my original letter of recommendation, I had 3 in my head: my microbiology professor, a pharmacist who I worked with, and my pharmacy technician certification teacher. This pharmacy technician certification teacher, she was in the field of pharmacy as a technician for about 15 years, and she taught as a technician teacher at a local career college that I was going to as a senior in high school. And it sounded like a good idea. Let's be real, it sounded like a good idea because she was in the field for 15, 20 years, and she helped, and she was also a good letter of recommendation that I used to get into U of H. But the issue, though, is that she was a high school teacher. High school teachers are not ideal for getting into a graduate program. And so my application came a bit under review because you wanted to kind of clarify my relationship to her. If she was more of a mentor figure or a high school teacher. And so this is where I think Dr. De La Cruz's mentioning of having 5 people in your head for the letter recommendation was very important, because I had 5 people or so, and I decided that with my PharmCast application, UH College PharmD requires free. However, PharmCast gives you the option of 4 letters of recommendation in case you want to add in an extra person. So with my 4th spot, I was able to put in a volunteer coordinator for a volunteer program I was in at Memorial Hermann TMC. And that was able to help me push along my application and get an interview in time before the early admissions closed up. And the reason I really needed this was because there was a lot of communication issues between the college and my high school teacher, and they weren't able to really clarify things. And that's why we really needed to go ahead and get in that last letter of recommendation, and things worked out relatively fine afterwards.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. And how much time did you give your professor to write that letter?
I gave my pharmacist and my San Jacinto professor about 2 months or so to write the letter of recommendation. I gave my high school professor also 2 months. And so though with my Memorial Hermann volunteered person, the thing with them is they require 100 hours of volunteer before they can write the letter of recommendation. So I gave them a month in advance, though that was before I hit that 100 hours. So really, in a sense, I gave them a month and a half, though in actuality, it was more like 2 or 3 weeks or so.
Gotcha. So thank you for that, Mike. I appreciate that. I want to give Arshia again. Forgive me.
It's Arshia.
Arshia. I've seen it on paper a lot, but please tell us more about your experience with letters of reference and how that was obtained for you.
So I actually started writing my list and the people who I want to ask a year in advance. I had the professor who I thought it would be the most strongest, the best who can make my application strongest, a year before even, I think last cycle I wrote them down. And then when I was taking their classes, I actually asked them in person. And then the end of the semester, when the grades were submitted, which still wasn't time for me to submit the recommendation letter, I sent them an email with my resume and tell them that I will need their help in future when I'm applying for school, if they are able to write me a recommendation letter and tell specifically about me. I tried to choose the smaller classroom, more science classes with the professors, so they can know me the best, the one that I was engaged, they can tell specific thing about me instead of just as Ms. Priyanka said, checking the boxes, if she did this, if she had this grade. So after, when it was time for PharmCast, for the professor, I sent the first thing I did when I started my application, I emailed the professor again, appreciated them, they gave me the opportunity that they write the letter for me. And then again submitted this time I had my personal statement ready. Mm-hmm. So I sent the personal statement with my resume, to the professor, ask them if they can write it for me. And then because I gave them like almost about like 2 semesters, he act like as soon as I send it, he submitted next morning. So like my recommendation letter was in like 24 hours. And then about like before all that, I checked the website, the page that Miss Priyanka showed in the website. And if you guys go to the Farmcast, it has specifically for you that UHCOP like doesn't have specifically you need 2 professor or like 1 supervisor. You have more options, so you can have like a more big of a list of who you want to ask for. So I chose 2 of the pharmacists that I worked the most with because they knew me the best. They knew if I'm on time, how engaged I am, like how much I love this profession, or like they knew my personality beside my grade. So I also asked them, I asked them a lot while I was working, maybe like reminded them that I will need their help, like look how like detail about me if you know me the best. And then they also write it like as soon as I submitted, like 2-3 months before, they submitted like in a week. So I had my recommendation letter in before even my application was complete. I still had to work on my application, but all my letter of recommendation was in.
Excellent. Excellent. Mrs. Sapp, is your audio in place yet?
Can you
Oh,
guys hear me?
Yes, you are being heard, Mrs. Sapp.
Oh, great. Excellent. Thank you. So thank you for the introductions from Michael and Arshia. These are 2 of our pre-pharmacy association members. They're officers. And so they've both been accepted into our pharmacy program. So very kudos to them first and foremost. Can't wait till you guys are our P1s in our class. And like you just saw, Dr. De La Cruz, that was a fantastic template that he showed that our student was able to share with him to ask for letters of recommendation on the out end. They're trying to get out of this program and getting to a residency, but you guys, same applies for getting into the pharmacy program, how you ask professors and how you ask your supervisors. So Arshia and Michael, chime in if either one of you want to. How comfortable did you feel asking for this competitive letter? Like, did you feel comfortable approaching them? Like, how did you work on the relationship ahead of time with your professor or your faculty member before you asked them?
So since I mentioned I had planned what classes I wanna, like I planned that like maybe organic chemistry is like the most class that will make my application stronger. From the beginning of the semester, I start engaging with the professor. At the beginning, it's a little bit hard, but I try to know the professor, like stay out of like after class, talk to him, ask more questions, and see what he even thinks. If I'm like sometimes the professor knows you even better than you, like you know yourself. So I at the first it's a little bit uncomfortable, but when you go more forward, you'll see that you have a better relationship with them, and then they can definitely write you a stronger letter the more they know you. So it might be uncomfortable, but this is your future. This is your career. So you have to, if you're shy, you have to put it aside. You have to try your best to let the professor know you so they can write you a better letter.
Right. Same with you, Michael. Like, what was that relationship like with, instead of just asking someone you made a straight A in their course, like how did you approach that faculty member, or in what way did y'all have a relationship?
So I got a letter recommendation from my San Jacinto College microbiology professor. And that class was a pretty small class, about 9 people. So everybody was able to kind of speak up, show their own voice. So when it came down to sending her the email, or really asked her in the class at the very end if she could write me a letter recommendation, it was sort of really simple, to be honest. It was really easy to just go ahead and ask her to get it done in a few months from then, because we already built up a relationship through my taking her a little 5-week class and me being in her class 4 hours a day for 4 days a week for 5 weeks. So that really,
and so right. And so that makes a big difference. And like Arshia said, her letters were in before her application was even in. And so that's something that I think for all the applicants watching is that you will not be offered an interview until your letters are all in, right? So that's important to know, that you do want to ask someone that you know will submit the letter fairly quickly on your behalf and not wait until the deadline, because by the deadline, it could be fairly late into the cycle. another question for Michael and Arshia, just simple question. You saw that template that Dr. De La Cruz had. What type of documents did you provide to your recommender, your evaluator? What did you give them in addition to just asking as far as the request, like your CV, your letter, your references? What did you do?
I basically sent something similar, but that was really nice. It was perfect. I never sent something like that, but I did send like an email with specifically everything, like introduce myself in like a more friendly way than my personal statement. I include my personal statement, my resume, and then if they are able to, like I mentioned a lot that I know they're busy, and then I really need this letter to be in ASAP because I want to get like to the interview. I want to get invited to an interview. So I had a cute little email that showed everything, like they're easy for them to see, so they can easily put the information. I mentioned like exactly what class I'm in with them and stuff like that.
Right. And that's important too. Like De La Cruz said, everything that he had on his template, it was all right there. So he didn't really have to go back and recall, what class did I have you for? Where did I, in case he didn't remember or had so many students asking, it was all right there in front of him. Did you do something similar, Michael?
So with the letter of recommendation that wasn't able to go through with my high school teacher, I was able to send her a solid CV of everything I've done since I graduated high school. I mentioned in the courses I've taken, the overall accomplishments I've done, the volunteer experiences I've had, along with like I made an attempt to go ahead and like meet with her in person because I felt like that would also like be a good recapping of how the progress that I've made since I've taken her class. So of course, the progress I've made since I've taken her class. So I feel like that the best way to reapproach the letter of recommendation is to just remind them that you are a capable human being who has taken, or who I guess deserves a letter of recommendation. I guess deserves a strong word for it, but.
So I like that both of you have good, two very good points, because for you, Michael, it's that personal touch. Like, I will meet you in person. I will talk to you. I will remind you exactly what I've done and how I can help. And assuming they have the time to meet with you, that's great personal aspect that sometimes is missed from people who are requesting letters of recommendation. Arshia, I like that it was very, again, two different styles and two different approaches. You had a template together, you kind of had a cover letter almost, along with your resume or your CV, and then all the classes that you had with that professor and why you needed the letter. So these are two different approaches, but also very good approaches that got you very strong letters of recommendation for yourselves. So are there any questions? I'm gonna open it up to our panel members that are watching on today. What would you like to ask our students? Because again, these are two people that have literally just gone through the process of how to ask for letters of recommendation. You hear from the professionals, Dr. De La Cruz, you've heard from our career services office, but what would you like to ask students specifically on their journey or their approach when they were asking for letters of recommendation? And while you guys type that into the chat box, like I'll allow you to type, while we do that, let me go to Michael and Arshia. What would you have done differently? Is there anything you would have changed in how you chose the people that you chose to write letters of recommendation for you or to request those letters? And also, what would you improve upon, should you have to do this again? I don't know, for if you want to do like scholarship purposes when you guys get into pharmacy school. So is there anything that if you had to assess yourself, what would you change or improve upon the next go round?
So I don't think I would change about the recommendation letter who I chose, but I have a little tip there. There is option that you can submit 4 letters instead of 3. I'm not sure if they will read the 4 or the 3 of them, but this gives you an option if something happened, like what Dr. De La Cruz mentioned, if like a week before or 2 weeks before deadline you have submitted there, they decided, I don't know, an emergency happened or something important happened and they were not able to submit it for you, you still have your 3 requirements there, and then you can get your things there like on time. That's what I did. I have submitted like 4 letters. So if anything emergency happened, I will still be on time and have my letters, like all the requirements in. And I think in my application, what if I could go back like 2 years before and then change anything, I would like to like done a research if it was an option for me to, for the scholarship reason that you mentioned. I would love to
I
be
mean,
like.
it's not too late. Look, Dr. De La Cruz is on right now. It's not too late when you get to pharmacy school. So there's opportunities for research when you get into pharmacy school. Okay, just putting that out there. Anything for you, Michael? If you had to reassess yourself or the people you asked, what would you do?
I would say that what I mentioned earlier about getting personal by letter of recommendation, I do that to, I guess, a greater extent with the rest of them as well, because I feel like that would have resulted in even stronger letters than I was able to already submit. And I guess I know I mentioned that I submitted them like 2 months in advance, but I kind of wish I also did a bit earlier, or got in the mindset of doing it as early as Arsha did it, to be honest.
Okay, excellent. I see Carolyn wrote creating the rapport prior to asking a letter gives an idea of a stronger letter. And really what that means, stronger letter means more content. There's always the opportunity to write a letter of this is a great student, this is a strong student, this is a hardworking student. But the more time you are able to experience with your evaluator, they can speak to very specific events, a project that you worked on, a paper that you wrote, how you helped or serviced a customer that you went above and beyond. They're able to speak to that. So those are those important connections that they could call upon or make that letter very personal. And it's not just kind of that standard letter of just a great person or just a hardworking person. It's like very specific events. So that's what makes that letter stronger, are very specific events.
Sure. And one thing I would interject, as far as when you're thinking about, and Dr. De La Cruz is really good about, showing like how the different sources of people and what they can really bring out that's not already displayed in your application, would be that if you've had a challenge with some of your courses, and let's say that you repeated a class and you may feel uncomfortable asking the professor who maybe didn't get an A or you maybe didn't get as high grade as you hoped in that class, but the professor still worked with you, or even if you're taking the class for a second time, that professor could speak to how much you've grown as a student, how much you've improved in those content areas, and really address some of those things that the admissions committee may be asking internally. Is like, well, how strong are they in biology? I see their grades weren't as high as we'd like them to be. A professor that can specifically, address those items can really help round out your application and really kind of, fill in some of those questions the committee may be asking.
Thank you, Mr. Ely, for that additional information. So as we are getting to the end of our webinar, this is where we open up questions for all of our panelists. So if you did have a question for our career services, for our faculty members, and any other questions for our students, now would be the time to ask some of those questions. And if there's anything you want to add right now, Ms. Jessica.
Yeah, no, so it's just opened up for questions. So if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them either in the Q&A or the chat box. Also, I know Carolyn had some great questions and Mr. Ely did touch upon those. So Mr. Ely, if you want to share that with everybody else as well. I also did share a link in the chat box. It is a survey. I would greatly appreciate if all of you could please take a minute to answer those questions. It's very short. It's just very helpful to get some feedback and to know what other topics we could touch upon in the future that would be helpful to you.
I don't see any other questions. So hopefully everyone is able to do that survey for us. That will definitely help us with future webinars, future events and activities. So just take a few moments to complete.
And there was a question that that Carolyn asked about if she wanted to. Her question was, what if I want to see what the reference, what the person's going to say about me before submitting it? And in the PharmCast application specifically, there's a box you'd select for letters of reference called waive right of access to this evaluation. And if a person said, if you as an applicant say, yes, I waive my right of access, that means that the evaluator does, that you will not ever see what the evaluator says. And the evaluator can, they may give more candid, information with their reference, than if you do not waive your right of access. If you say, no, I do not waive right of access, the person writing that letter may be a little more, may hold a little more back and may not give as much information because they know that you as a student want to read it. So I'm just going to keep that in mind. The waiver of access, typically I would encourage folks to waive your right of access. That way the evaluator can really they may give you us that are reviewing your records more information.
And we have a question from John, and then if Dr. De La Cruz could take this question. So his question is, what would be a good way to ask for a letter of recommendation from a licensed pharmacist?
Yes, great question, John. I would say that it doesn't differ too much from that of a professor. It would still need to be done early. Another recommendation would be that you would still have to have some rapport with this licensed pharmacist. I wouldn't get too caught up in credentials regarding, a licensed pharmacist who is clinically trained, that went through residency, that's also a professor, that is leader of this organization. Don't really get caught up in the weeds with that. I would say really focus on someone who really does know you and can vouch for all of those qualities that we talked about earlier. That's where it will really help us when we're reading through these letters of recommendation. So yes, a licensed pharmacist would be helpful because then we can see just how well you performed in a pharmacy, whether you were employed under them as a technician, how you worked with patients, and maybe they can help us understand your true passion for pharmacy, which again may be difficult for us to assess through a normal application itself. So I would say, again, starting early, which is one point that we've really covered a lot. And then also what was mentioned earlier, I think asking them in person for that initial request is very important as well. And then again, you can always have follow-up emails, but having that initial one-to-one approach and making sure that a relationship is already established rather than someone who just doesn't even know you. So does that help answer your question, John? Okay, so let's see. I don't know any and have not worked for any, so I'm a bit lost onto how to go about asking. I know that it is a requirement. So there are different approved sources, John, for your letter of recommendation. A licensed pharmacist is one of the approved sources, but also a college professor, also an employer, a supervisor, a teaching assistant, the pre-health advisor, and a faculty advisor. So not necessarily a requirement to have just that one from a licensed pharmacist. Any of those approved sources for 3 of them would work. Is there anything else that y'all wanted to add, Mr. Ely or Mrs. Zuniga, about that?
Not about that, but just kind of one thing is from a logistical standpoint for y'all, when you're, and Arsha had a great example with one of the folks that she was concerned with, that one person may needed to, if it gets close to the deadline or close to when everything else you have is ready, and this person who's writing that letter of reference says that they're going to do it, but they just aren't able to get around to it. I want you to give them the opportunity to gracefully decline. the letter of reference. You can let them know, hey, Dr. Smith, I know you mentioned that you've got a lot going on in your life. If I have another person that can write letter of reference, if you feel you're just not, you just won't be able to fit it in. And if you give them that opportunity to gracefully decline, they would appreciate that versus, kind of having that tension that they might have with their relationship with you. And then what you can do in the PharmCast system is take that person's name and contact info out, put in that new person who is writing you that letter of reference, and get that thing submitted so we can get your application moving through our process.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm not sure if we did address Carolyn's question about the 3 required letters and if they can submit more. So you only have the option to submit a total of 4 letters of recommendation. Only 3 are required. You can submit that extra one if you choose to, but also keep in mind, like Michael, who had to submit an additional letter because one of the letters was from a high school teacher, which was not an approved source. You might have to submit it at a later time. So try to leave room for that just in case you don't have the 3 letters from the required sources. That 4th one can replace one of the other 2. Another point to make is that you can submit your PharmCast application without the letters of recommendation, and then you can submit the letters once they are ready. That allows us to start with the other portion of the application, start reviewing your prerequisite courses and other requirements while we wait for those letters. So if you're still waiting on your recommender, just keep in mind you can still submit your PharmCast application. And I don't see any other questions. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. If you do think of any questions later today, here is our contact information, our email address, and our phone number. Feel free to reach out. Thank you to all that submitted the survey. If you haven't already, please take a minute to do so. And I think that's it for today. Thank you to our speakers as well. Thank you so much for your time today.